Hello everyone, and welcome to your video on the point slope form. So before we start talking about point slope, I want to go back and talk about the slope-intercept form. What is the slope-intercept form? Well, that is y equals mx plus b. That's the slope-intercept form. It's my favorite form. It's the most useful form. It's awesome. However, there are some limitations. If we know that this is our slope, and we know that this is our y-intercept, then we can take any line on a graph and we can put it into this form, right? And that would be awesome. The problem is that sometimes we do not know what the slope and the y-intercept is. We might know one or the other, but we don't know them both. And that is when the point slope form starts to come in handy. So the point slope form is this. It is y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. Now I know you're like, what? First of all, what are those little sub numbers? And second of all, it's so big and messy. And patience, young Padawans, we will figure it all out. All right, so let me give you an example. Let's say that we are told that a graph exists in the universe. And on this graph, there is a straight line that goes through these 2 points. It goes through point 22 and it goes through point 45. Let's just draw a little picture of that graph. So it goes through 22, that's here, and it goes through 45, that's here. Okay, and this is our line, and it keeps going in both directions. Okay, now you'll notice that we can extend this line as I just did and have it cross the y-axis, but that does not give us very good information as to where it exactly goes. Like, does it exactly hit the 0, 0? No, it doesn't seem to. Is it a -1? Is it a -2? Is it a -1.5? Is it a -0.65? We just don't know, because this is a hand-drawn graph that, could be wrong for any number of reasons. All right. We know, however, that we have a line that goes through those 2 points. And because we know that, and because these are little numbers, we can calculate our slope, right? This is going to be 0.42 right here. And we can say, okay, from 2 to 4 is 2, and from 2 to 5 is 3, so our slope is change in rise over our change in run. So in this case, our slope is 3 over 2. And we will just double check that we want a positive slope here, and we do, because we see that this is an uphill hill that we have made. So we have calculated our slope. Now, can we put things in y equals mx plus b terms? Well, still no, because y equals, now we have a slope of 3 over 2, but we still don't know what our b is, right? This is still a huge question mark for us. So what we are going to do is we are going to use this point slope form, and we are going to fill things in. Now, I'm going to get a new piece of paper because I don't want to have to scrunch all this together. So I will just rewrite, just as a reminder, we're going through points 22 and 45. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to label these 2 points for us. And by labeling them, I mean, I know that this one is X, and I know that this one is Y, and I know that this one is X and this one is Y, but I don't want to call them the exact same thing because they're a different ordered pair. Does that make sense? Right? So I could call them like A and B if I wanted, or I could call them, Fred and George, but I think it would be better if I named it something so that I could sort of remember that this is an X coordinate, and I could sort of remember that this is a y coordinate. So I just put these little sub 1s. If you don't like sub 1s, you can put sub 3s. If you don't like sub 3s, you can put point 7s as your subs if you want. Although usually people just stick to the round numbers. If you wanted to, instead of having nothing and 1s, you could have 1s and 2s. That's also very, very common. But in any event, this is going to help you keep up with which coordinate pair we're talking about. So now our point slope formula is y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. That's our formula. So what we could do here in this situation is we could say, okay, y we know is the 2, and y sub 1 is the 5, right? And m, we still don't know m. We're going to pretend like we did not make this little chart. That is one way to calculate our m, but now we're going to do it a different way. And then here we have our x, which is 2, and our x sub 1, which is 4. So let's just do this math. So this is going to be negative 3 over here on this side equals m times negative 2. Divide both sides by negative 2. I get m equals positive 3 over 2, which, hey, is exactly what we got here, right? When we did it through graphing and visualization. We got that same thing here. All right, now that we have this slope, now we can use that and this same formula, y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1. We're going to use this slope information stuck in here to figure out what our y-intercept is. So far we know these points. We know 2, 2, and we know 4, 5. Those are the ones that came before. But we don't care about those. We want 0, b, right? We want 0 and then our y-intercept. That's what we're looking for. And we don't have that information yet, so we're going to figure it out. So I'm going to let this be my x and my y, and I'm going to let this be my x sub 1 and my y sub 1. Or I could do it x sub 2 and y sub 2. Here, how about if I do that? Because this is x sub 1, y sub 1, so I'll make this x sub 2, y sub 2. Okay. So that's going to be 2 minus my y sub 2, which is b, which will, I'll keep it as y sub 2, equals our m, which is 3 over 2, times our x, which is 2, minus our x sub 2, which we're saying is 0, right? We want it to be 0. So now we should be able to solve and get our y sub 2. So I get 2 minus y sub 2 equals 3 over 2 times 2, because 2 minus 0 is still 2. So that's 2 minus y sub 2 is going to equal 6 over 2, which is 3, right? Because 3 over 2 times 2 over 1 is 6 over 2, which reduces to 3, right? That's my little side calculation there. I will subtract 2 from each side. I get negative y sub 2 equals 1. So positive y sub 2 is going to equal negative 1. This is my y-intercept. This is what my y value is when my x value is 0. It's what my y value is when my x value is 0. So now I know that I have 3 points. I have 2, 2, I have 4, 5, and I also have 0, negative 1. And if you remember, back at our little chart that we drew when we actually drew this graph, this looks like it could be -1, right? I mean, that's an okay guess. I didn't know just by looking at the chart, but I see that my chart and my calculated answer makes sense together. If my chart looked like this and my calculated answer were -612, I would have a question about some erroneous math somewhere. But this kind of makes sense. Okay, so this means I can finally write my equation. Y equals mx plus b. So I have y equals, my m I know is 3/2. It's the same thing I calculated. X plus b, which is -1. So I could write it y equals 3/2x minus 1. That would probably be the most appropriate way to write it. Okay, so all I'm doing is I am using this form or this picture, whatever is easiest for you. You want to try to figure out what your slope is and then use one of your coordinates for x and y and then make the other one be x equals 0 and then calculate your y value. We're going to do lots of examples of this in your homework, but hopefully this is starting to make a little bit of sense. I do want to show you one thing before I let you go. So we have this formula. This is our point slope formula. Y minus y sub 1 equals m times x minus x sub 1, right? Notice that this is the change in y equals m times the change in x, right? Do you see how that is? The difference between your y values is the change in y. The difference between your x values is the change in x, right? Does that make sense? Okay, I want you to notice where this comes from. Remember, we said that the formula for slope could be written as the change in rise over the change in run, which is the same thing as the change in y over the change in x. If I were to take this and I were to divide by the change of x, I get m equals the change of y over the change of x. So I just want you to see that all of this, it makes sense. You're always doing the same thing. So here we're calculating the difference in our y value, and we're putting it over the difference in our x value, and that is giving us our slope. So it's just a different way to approach the same thing. All right, this will start to make a little bit more sense too once you start doing your homework problems. So why don't you go do those now?